In a recent piece for the New York Times entitled "When is Speech Violence?", she argues in defense of banning speeches by figures like Milo Yiannopoulos, calling him a provocateur and hate monger and saying there is, quote, nothing to be gained from debating him. But she doesn't stop there. She says her anti-speech posture is based in science and that scientifically speaking, some speech literally is as harmful as physical violence. Lisa Feldman Barrett joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on your show.
So if certain speech is tantamount to violence, obviously we need to ban it. Violence is harmful to people. Who decides under your plan what speech is allowed and which is banned?
Well, Tucker, first I have to point out the fact that I actually didn't advocate or in any way argue for banning anybody. I didn't argue for censorship. And in fact, the article wasn't even really about free speech. It was about two things, okay? The first thing that it was about was choosing speakers. Some speakers invite debate. And as I said in my article, debate is the lifeblood of democracy. It's really important. So it's important to invite people who will initiate discussion and debate around provocative, controversial, and even offensive ideas, and particularly on college campuses, because debate opens minds. But hateful speech closes minds, so just don't invite those people. And the second point that I made.
Okay, wait, can we just do one?
No, let me finish because it's really important. Okay. It's important to make the point, right?
Okay, but I just want to address them one at a time. Okay.
No, the second point that I made is that at this particular moment in time, hateful speech is particularly problematic because we live in a culture that is full of casual brutality, that people say horrible things to each other on social media. Bullying is rampant in schools, and now we even have politicians who just lob the F-bomb at one another. And this kind of verbal aggression, if it goes on for long enough, is harmful to your nervous system. It makes people more likely to be sick.
I'm going to sneak a question in here.
Yeah.
I got it. So obviously this is a pretext for censorship. My question remains the same, which is who decides what speech can be heard? You're arguing against allowing all speech to be heard because some of it you don't classify as debate, but instead as hate speech. My question is who gets to make that decision? It's a subjective decision. And who's empowered to make it? You?
Yeah. No, not at all. In fact, there are two parts that I want to address in what you just said. The first is that I'm not talking about censorship. I'm talking about who to invite. For example, you run a television. You run a television show. You have to make decisions about who you invite and who you don't. Are you telling me that all the people that you choose not to invite, you're censoring those people?
No, what I'm saying is that if I take you out of one classification and move you into another, it's an effort to silence you. If I were to say your ideas are so stupid, hold on. If I were to say your ideas are so stupid they're not really ideas, therefore we don't have to listen to them or debate you, what I'm doing is trying to silence you. I'm trying to put you outside of the pale. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're making a case for censorship, as you know, but you're too disingenuous to admit it. But my question remains the same, which is who gets to make that determination? Who decides what's hate and what's debate? Who makes that call? Well, it's simple.
I will answer your question about who gets to decide in a second, but I first want to address the point that you just made. I think that it's, people start to call each other names when they think they can't win a debate on the basis of the strength of their arguments. Debate is the lifeblood of democracy, as I said in my op-ed. Yes. And debate means that you have to foster an opportunity for people to actually express their views. So when I tell you that censorship is different from choosing to invite, when I make the point that, free speech gives you the right to say offensive things, but it doesn't necessarily give you you shouldn't expect the right to be invited everywhere.
And I am disagreeing and you're trying to overtalk me here.
Well, it's not debate when you tell me.
But you're watching debate happen and you don't like it. I'm waiting for you to call me.
No, actually, I was hoping.
Practitioner of hate speech.
No, not at all. But lobbing insults at people, isn't debate.
I'm soliciting an answer from you. I keep asking you the same question, which is, how do we decide? What are the standards? Who gets to make that call? What's legitimate and what's not? And you can't answer the question.
I can answer the question. It's just you keep clouding it with insults.
Come on, Professor, just give me a real answer.
Yeah, the real answer is a reasonable person, when a reasonable person is fearful for their own safety or the safety of someone else, that classifies as hateful speech.
How do you decide what a reasonable person is? Perhaps I feel intimidated. Hold on, maybe I feel intimidated by you right now. I think I'm a reasonable person. Should we, consign you to the hate speech bin? I mean, what does that even mean? These are totally subjective categories. That's why normal people, old-fashioned liberals, used to say, we let everybody talk, right? Remember that?
Yeah, yeah. So reasonable person is actually a concept in the U.S. law. It's a concept that's used by judges and lawyers and other legal actors to make legal decisions.
I got 30 seconds. Define what it means.
A reasonable person is the average person.
Oh, the average person. The average, as defined by what? What does that mean, the average person?
The point is that we have
you can't define
we have a public health crisis, and in that context, it becomes really more important to choose to invite people who will discuss controversial and offensive topics. I actually said that in my op-ed. What I'm saying is, if you're going to make decisions about who to invite, pick the people who will engage in debate, and avoid the people who won't. And there's an extra reason for doing that now, because
But you're not, I still am confused by what you're saying. I mean, how do we know the average person, you haven't thought through your argument. It seems to me what you're saying, with respect, is there are some views that I don't like. They're not real views. I don't have to take them seriously because I don't feel like engaging with them. So just shut up. Because I'm asking you to define your terms and you don't seem like you can.
I did define my terms.
Okay, so what is the average person?
It's a legal concept.
Which means what? You don't seem to understand what it means. How do you define it?
Are you telling me that you can't tell the difference between censorship and the difference between who to invite? Are you telling me? Are you telling me that?
I'm trying to get you to define a term that you introduced into the conversation. Reasonable person, average person. I'm asking you a simple question. What does that mean? You can't answer it. You're changing the subject, and I'm just saying you're the one who wrote the New York Times op-ed, but you didn't bother to think this through with any precision.
I'm not changing the subject. I'm telling you that my op-ed was about one thing, and you seem persistent to try to make it about something else.
No,
you cherry
it's the
pick
core
words.
question. Create a straw man. Anything. I'm asking you to define what you're talking about. I'm not one of the children sitting in your classes who nods in bovine agreement. I'm an adult who demands an adult answer, and you don't have one.
I gave you an answer. I absolutely gave you an answer.
Okay, well, I could ask you for the 5th time what that actually means, but you don't seem to have an answer, which I think tells
I answered you. You just didn't like my answer. You didn't like my answer, and so instead you just lob insults.
And I don't actually understand how that.
I don't actually understand how that actually promotes the kind of debate which fosters a democracy. I really don't.
Okay, because I don't think that you believe in debate. You don't want to hear ideas that you disagree with. I'm sorry.
If I didn't believe in debate, I wouldn't be on your show.
You didn't do a very good job, with respect. Professor, thanks for joining us.
Well, with respect.
Well, we let that go as long as we could and try and find out what makes a reasonable person.